Colonial Outcasts, the anti-imperialist podcast. Hello and welcome to Colonial Outcasts, the anti-imperialist podcast that at least one of your uncles will hate. Specifically, the one who watches Saturday Night Live. Rachel Maddow is a member of a $250 a month gym, has a subscription to both the New Yorker and Atlantic magazines, and listens to NPR every day. And since about half of our audience is not American, it essentially just means he's a liberal, most likely from either the West Coast or the Northeast, and is therefore pro-Ukraine war and now anti-ethnic cleansing in Gaza, now that Trump has put out a weird AI video about it. Yes, today we are doing a rare Sunday episode to leisurely walk through the new U.S.-Ukraine relationship, the media response to the whiplash change in U.S. foreign policy, and potentially the Trump administration's hypocrisy over Taiwan as we eye a $10 billion arms deal to Taiwan to bolster the long-standing porcupine strategy. In the recent words of Secretary of State Marco Rubio, quote, to make the cost of invading higher than the benefit. And of course, we're talking about a potential Chinese invasion across the Strait of Taiwan. All part of this administration's peace through strength motto. Anyways, it all begins with Ukraine. To that end, we are joined by regular contributor Alina Xenofontos for our weekly Geopolitical episode, as well as Nick, founder of Revolutionary Blackout Network, citizen journalist, and activist. You're online at Socialist MMA on Twitter or X. Thank you so much for taking the time on a Sunday to come on and talk about all this.
Yeah, man, there's a lot to talk about. I appreciate you inviting me on.
Yeah, of course. So I have a short monologue this time. You guys won't have to strap in for too long, but in the end, the shrieking, chain-rattling ghost of Henry Kissinger is always right. Quote, it may be dangerous to be America's enemy, but to be America's friend is fatal. He also said, quote, America has no permanent friends or enemies, only interests, unquote. And honestly, Ukrainians and to a lesser extent, Europeans are figuring out what it means to be Kurdish. And they are spiraling. Western Europeans, liberal elites, and establishment figures are seeing the face the U.S. presents to nations of the global South. And the truly shocking thing is they're now getting the same treatment in a humiliatingly public way, and they just weren't prepared for it. This whole thing reminds me of what Emmy Césaire discussed in Discourse on Colonialism, which was like seconded by Hannah Arendt in The Origins of Totalitarianism. And I think Césaire's book was first in the canon. It talked about how the Holocaust was only shocking to Europeans because this scale and form of industrialized genocide pioneered in the colonial era in places like Namibia and the Congo, boomerang back on white Europeans. So it's like sheer unmasked liberal white supremacy on display this weekend. And if you want to see a synthesis of the liberal media point of view, watch the SNL cold open from tonight. So I'm just going to play like a couple minutes of it, because I grew up with SNL, usually loved it, but this one's kind of painfully cringeworthy. So, and then we're just going to open up the discussion.
Today, President Trump hosted Ukrainian President Zelensky at the White House, and it went really, really well. Everyone who watched felt at ease and thought the world is now a safer place. Here now is a replay of their historic press conference.
Yes, hello, everyone. It is I, President and CEO of Gaza Hotel and Casino, Donald Trump.
And since I know most of you all listen to the audio, we have a mock-up of the press conference from Friday. We've got Zelensky seated to the left of Trump, and then to the right, J.D. Vance, and then Marco Rubio, who looked incredibly uncomfortable the entire time.
And I'd like to welcome President Zelensky here to this incredible trap. It's going to be a big, beautiful trap, and we're going to attack him very soon for no reason, right, JD?
Watch out, because this kitty's got claws.
Very butch. And Marco Rubio's here, too. Little Marco. Little Marco, are you excited to attack our European ally?
Knowing less.
De nada. Before we get started, I'd like to thank President Zelensky for dressing like casual Star Trek. We love Star Trek because there's no DEI. The white guy was the leader. and he bossed around Spock, who I believe was Guatemalan. We love that. President Zelensky, you want to say a few words? Maybe tell Mr. Putin how much you love him and that you're sorry you invaded Russia? Maybe offer him one night with your wife?
Mr. President, with all due respect.
Excuse me? I'm sorry, what? I'm sorry, I have to jump in here because that's how we planned this. What happened to thank you, okay? Remember thank you? You haven't said thank you to us once in the past 15 seconds I've been...
Okay, sorry, y'all. That's as much as I could take in the cold open. I did watch the whole thing so that you didn't have to. You're freaking welcome, y'all. Yeah, but that's why I wanted to play it, because out of all the commentary from pundits I've seen on CNN, MSNBC, ABC, all the three-letter news organizations, yeah, that's kind of a summation of how they read the whole thing.
Yeah, it's impossible for a neoliberal comedy to ever be funny. I don't care what anyone says. There's no way that you can defend and support power structures and come out with successful comedy, at least that the working class can relate to, which is why SNL has been failing. There's so many things to say. I haven't seen the show. It's unbelievable cringe. I almost need to analyze it to see the propaganda of it. And this is why Republicans is almost better, because you notice how not better like in substance. I mean like in terms of raising awareness about issues, because you notice how they mentioned Gaza in the beginning. Mm-hmm. Trump want to build Gaza hotel, some joke like that. When have SNL ever mentioned Gaza during Biden?
Not until Trump was won the election.
Yeah, so to be clear, I'm not saying Trump is better. I'm saying this is why the Republicans are the least effective evil. Glenn Ford explained how the Democrats are the most effective evil because he can convince people who otherwise will care about stuff to go to sleep. So when Biden was president, there was no sympathy towards Palestinians, no coverage of Gaza. Trump took office for 1 week, and then CNN is doing segments about the Nakba. Like I've never seen it before. So at least when a Republican is in charge, we had to deal with the Zionist empire no matter what. But at least when a Republican is in charge, you can get the CNNs and liberals to pay attention about human rights abuses when they are in charge. Regarding what they're covering, in the general liberal media meltdown has been hilarious. Like they gave the order to SNL to cover the Zelensky meeting, and I have to be 100% clear. And the freak out is hilarious to witness to me, because the way that Trump spoke to Zelensky is very similar to how the United States has spoken to African countries, to countries in the global South. It just, many of these liberals, they are just outraged because they're not used to seeing white European leaders treated the same way we treat countries in the global South. William Ruto, famous sellout, the Kenyan president, he gave a speech, and this is what led him to being elected, because he rode the wave of Pan-Africanism and rejecting the West. And he gave a speech where he explained how the West routinely humiliates African leaders because they will have an African conference in Europe, for example. Now, just to outline how crazy that is, can you imagine a European conference being hosted in Africa? That would never happen. It's a humiliation that they give to African leaders where they are summoned like children. They are summoned like children, have to go to Europe, and they are treated like children. So William Ruto ran on the idea that I won't be an African leader that will go to an African summit outside of our continent. I won't allow Western leaders to dictate our actions. Then he got elected president. The first thing he did was attend an African summit in Europe. And then he sent Kenyan police troops to fight in Haiti. So he's more than happy to be in a Western puppet. But the point is, there's a lot of people in Africa that was tired of this. He won and lied to the African people because he said he's going to restore dignity, the same dignities that the United States and Europe never provided their leaders. Now you got to see the reaction of the West now that Zelensky is being treated like the Western proxies and countries in the global South like the United States have treated all the while. I just thought it was interesting to see the contrast with Michael McFaul. He definitely was about to cry on MSNBC, but Greg, go ahead.
I was just commenting, and Alina talked, and I've talked about this before when this story first started. developing, or well, I mean, this whole Trump, Russia, Zelensky thing was coming to a head over the past couple months, but the dam finally broke Friday. But we were talking about this last week, Alina. What we've seen over the past couple weeks, and something that the liberal media establishment is struggling to deal with, is how, you know, the Republicans, they do the same thing in terms of like imperialism and throwing U.S. weight and hard power around, but the Republicans just take the mask off. They just have the decorum about it. So when Trump's like, we're going to start the peace talks in Riyadh, and no Ukrainian official is going to be in those talks, it's like, okay, now he's just showing that Ukraine had like no agency as, you know, a world power, and it kind of looks like a proxy war to me, just because why weren't they part of the peace process? And I think there's would you agree that they're struggling to kind of cope or interpret that?
Yeah, it's refreshing, isn't it, to have the face of the empire that doesn't have the veneer of pretending about human rights, which is why, once again, Democrats are the most effective evil, because Biden will fund the Ukraine war and said we're supporting democracy in Ukraine. We're supporting Israel because they're the only democratic country in the Middle East fighting against terrorism. Meanwhile, Trump would say, no, we want to build houses on Gaza. No, Ukraine is just a proxy. We wanted to take the rare earth mineral. So with the Republicans and the right, there's a lot of people that I speak to in the global South and in anti-imperialist movements. They'd rather have that, the out in the open empire, than the democratic empire, which hides behind, we standing for the rules-based order. We're standing for human rights as they support war criminals. And that's why your point is great, Greg, because they do the same thing. And they hate Trump because he says the quiet part out loud. And that's a very important point to remember.
Yeah,
and
it reminds me. It reminds me of the classic Malcolm X quote about liberals. You know, Republicans are the wolf, but liberals are the fox. But Alina, I was reading one of your pieces, and you made a comment, and I'm going to play a clip before you go into it real quick, about how Trump accidentally or not accidentally said the quiet part out loud. Like, he's the one who started arming Ukraine in the first place.
Yeah.
Let's just, in case some of you guys missed the actual footage because you're not psychos and you actually take some time off between the insane news cycle, we're just going to play some of the actual footage, or at least the audio from this historic, I would say historic press conference, because never have I seen such like an adversarial world leader on world leader bit before in the Oval Office. But anyways, here we go.
I want a ceasefire. I want to go, and I wanted this. Look, if you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you take it so the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course, we want to stop the war.
But you're saying you don't want a ceasefire.
But I said to you,
I want a ceasefire.
With guarantees.
Because you get a ceasefire faster than an agreement.
Ask our people about ceasefire, what they think.
There was.
Okay, I just have to say this. This is interesting. We can talk about this later, but every poll, I've been like going down a polling rabbit hole on Ukraine. Zelensky's actually polling higher than Trump is in his own country. And it seems like at least about 50 people support the war continuing going on. Now, in terms of demographics, like, are they Western Ukrainians who are, you know, affluent enough to not have to go to the front lines? Well, that's a complicating parameter. But I just wanted to say that that's why Zelensky just responded in that way.
Doesn't matter for you what.
That wasn't with me. That was with a guy named Biden, who was not a smart person. That was with Obama.
It was your president.
Excuse me. That was with Obama, who gave you sheets, and I gave you javelins.
Yes.
I gave you the javelins to take out all those tanks. Obama gave you sheets. In fact, the statement is Obama gave sheets and Trump gave javelins. You got to be more thankful.
Okay, a lot to unpack there, but what were you saying most significant about Trump saying that? Sorry, I just skim read your piece.
Yeah. No. Okay, so basically what I had actually stated in that piece was Trump had essentially admitted that the war in Ukraine, or the escalation that then eventually took place to the war, or led to the war in 2022, was a gradual buildup between both administrations, whether it was the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and the subsequent Biden administration, because he says, well, Obama gave sheets and I gave the javelin. So he's openly admitting that he was the one that actually initiated the lethal aid to Ukraine back in 2019, which was actually the sort of the base by which Ukraine was able to militarily sort of establish itself and prepare for war. Now, the ironic thing here is that he tries to actually claim, well, Trump tries to claim that Obama just gave sheets. And I think it's very important to sort of dissect the partisan politics that he tries to play on. Obama didn't actually just give sheets. When he gave that aid, that sort of the aid to Ukraine, between 2014 to 2016, he gave 600 million, and that actually included military equipment, training, artillery, and it was actually under the Obama administration, which was under the Ukraine Freedom Act, I think, in 2014, that even provided the legal means by which to give Trump the ability to even provide lethal aid anyway in the beginning to Ukraine. And actually, by the end of Obama's sort of time in power, or his administration, he had actually began to provide some for a very minor sort of lethal military aid to Ukraine. So what we're seeing here, what Trump was actually trying to claim, which essentially was, I helped you and you should be more grateful, was actually inadvertently admission that we were helping you prepare for war against Russia. So this is admission that yes, this was indeed a proxy war, and that's the irony here. So when Trump actually goes on one of his rants, he actually just gives away. This is one of the things that you have to appreciate about Trump in power, which is essentially what Nick was saying. He always tends to give away the bigger plan, It's also worth noting here that it's quite ironic seeing Zelensky become all the more frustrated at the fact that, well, Ukraine was invited to the negotiating table between the United States and Russia, and we need to be respected. But wasn't it last summer that there was a peace summit where every nation was invited, the European states, the US, and the only country that wasn't invited was Russia, who was part of the war? How are you supposed to have a peaceful negotiation when one of the parties wasn't present? So now Zelensky is receiving the same sort of treatment, and he's acting out about it. But nobody was stating anything when Russia was the one that was not invited to the peace conference. That's acceptable because humiliating Russia is perfectly acceptable to sort of the liberal media and sort of the liberal democratic class, I guess. Worth noting that.
Yeah, and also I just wanted to bring up one side point. It wasn't just military aid Obama was sending to Ukraine. There's also special forces groups on the ground trading for putting in insurgent infrastructure in place in certain regions of Ukraine in case of a Russian invasion. So go ahead.
I just want to say one more thing as well. We also have, for example, former NATO sort of commanders who had actually said, I think it was Jacques Bolt, who had actually stated he was actually placed in Ukraine by NATO in 2014 to 2015 in order to help Ukraine prepare militarily. And he's written extensively about this. So we can see here, in addition to, other projects from other European sort of states, such as the United Kingdom had Operation Orbital, they were gradually, obviously, infiltrating within Ukraine and creating the perfect conditions for war. And then at the same time, alleging that Russia was paranoid and delusional to have fears of, genuine security concerns because, Putin's just crazy. Yeah. So Trump, in a way, admitted to all this.
Yeah, those are great points. And the receipts you're mentioning, Alina, is exactly why Trump is trying to wipe his hands clean of this conflict, where he says repeatedly, Russia will never invade if I was in charge. Zelensky is preventing peace. And Trump is very masterful because he knows that history is written by the winners. He's trying to wipe his hands clean for being a part of what responsible for what is going to be a giant L for the Western establishment. Their proxy war against NATO has completely failed. And Trump, we know he's a narcissist. He don't want to be part of the losers club. You know what I mean? He don't want to be seen as a loser historically. So if history remembers him as someone who continued the Ukraine war, that's awful for him. So he is by blaming Zelensky the way he is, and by blaming Biden exclusively, he's attempting to wipe his hands clean. And I've seen plenty of corporate media headlines and segments where they're decrying the break from the neoliberal consensus on this issue. And I've seen quite a few talking heads say that we never seen presidents deviate for foreign policy like this before. And I wish I could share some of these clips because they openly admit, Greg and Alina, They said, oh, well, presidents don't really have a say. They essentially follow the same foreign policy. And that's why they're panicking. They have said this many times out in the open. And that's the true panic about Trump. Not that he's going to dismantle the empire, because he's not going to do that. They're just shocked because they've never seen someone take the White House and actually change a foreign policy decision made on behalf of the Pentagon. But go ahead, Greg.
No, I completely agree. Again, the decorum when it comes to Trump is completely gone in a way that just reminds me of like everything we make fun of Florida about. Like, because but so yes, it's a massive foreign policy shift, but the inherent principle of the empire isn't shifting at all, and that's where we bring in the mineral rights to Ukraine. So he's a businessman. He's not a traditional politician where, he again follows decorum. He's like, well, we have a sunk cost fallacy going on here. We've put this much money into it. We need to get something out of it. That's where the mineral deal comes in with Ukraine. I know you talked about this extensively. I'm not the biggest expert on where the deposits lay about the rare earth materials. I believe like some of it either lies in what is now Russian controlled Ukraine, and also in certain parts of Ukraine near the front lines that have no industrial capacity whatsoever. So I'm wondering, like, is he frustrated at all that like he can't realize that in the next 10 years? It would take a massive like economic stimulus to get that industry up and running after a war, like a 3-year war of attrition. And it just seems to me like sometimes he doesn't have the best grasp of like labor and logistics, because when he said they're going to rebuild Gaza after moving everybody out, I was like, what, you're going to move out your labor force and then move in a new labor force to do it? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? The mineral situation.
All right. So what I was going to say, this is the interesting part. So we've seen Trump essentially reiterate the point that he wants the mineral deal to go through. And he's been, he put on this beautiful show in the Oval White House. But this is the thing. The vast majority, I think the bulk of these minerals resources are actually in the eastern part of Ukraine, and at least 40% is found in Luhansk, Donetsk, and Zaporozhye. There's also in Kharkov as well. These are all, the vast majority of these territories are now controlled by Russia. They still haven't got complete control of some of these territories. There's still some which are under Ukrainians, very fragile control of these territories. But what does this mean? It means that the vast majority are within Russian territory. So that's the first thing. All of Ukraine's industrial capabilities and capacity are in eastern Ukraine, because eastern Ukraine was always historically the industrial sort of sector of Ukraine. That's actually, I mean, even if you go back to, if you want to get into history a little bit, the eastern part of Ukraine was actually given to Ukraine by Lenin in order to industrialize Ukraine, in order to obviously advance it economically. So the eastern part of Ukraine is where all its industrial capacity is, and now that's in the hands of Russia. And the remaining sectors of these particular territories in the Donetsk, Zaporozhye, and in the Luhansk region, there's no industrial capacity there, because that's within the regions that Russia has actually taken control of. So it was actually a Ukraine Mining Limited or something like that. It was a company that essentially came out and said, we are at a very underdeveloped stage by which we can actually start investing in producing these minerals anyway. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, and this is what's most important here, is that for investors to even begin investing in any sort of extraction of these resources and developing industrial capacity to produce them, the United States would actually have to provide security guarantees, because it's so close to the front lines that there needs to be security guarantees that there won't be another war breakout. Because then what do you have? Nobody's going to invest in flooding these territories with money to industrially produce these areas when a war might break out any minute. So then this goes back to what the European states are saying, where, oh, well, we want to, I mean, you've got Ukraine and France. They want to have 30,000 peacekeeping forces, and Trump said no. He keeps saying there will be some sort of peacekeeping force, but he's not really giving the details as to that. But this kind of aligns with that, because that means that there will have to be some sort of Western forces in Ukraine to provide the security in order to be able to extract these resources. And we know for a fact that Russia's not going to accept that, because that's exactly the reason this began in the first place. So how Trump plans, because he talks a big talk, he also wants to satisfy his supporters, the MAGA supporters. He talks a big talk that we're going to go to Russia, we're going to have these conversations, and there's going to be a peace deal. But how he actually plans on implementing that, it means, satisfying Russia's security concerns, but at the same time securing a minerals deal that requires security measures to be taken in Ukraine in the first place, doesn't really quite make sense. So the way I see it, and this is obviously just how I've analyzed it. Obviously, this is open for the discussion. To me, the entire show, the spectacle that we saw at the White House, was more so to appease his sort of fan base, his supporters, the MAGA supporters, that see, I am going to stand for for the United States. We're going to stop the war in Ukraine. That obviously infuriated the working class, and rightfully so in the United States. But at the same time, what he's offering, he eventually will probably have to give in terms of some providing Ukraine with security, but then that won't be accepted by Russia. So I don't really see this war ending. And at the same time, I don't really see anything going forward with the mineral deals. So but he has put on the show that people wanted to see. That's sort of my analysis there.
And I've just been updating my news feed this entire episode. And 4 minutes ago, when you started talking about this, Lavrov, foreign minister, said, quote, Lavrov described European proposals to keep peacekeeping troops in Ukraine as impudent, adding that it would be impossible without Russia's consent. He said, firstly, no one asks us. Trump understands everything. He said that it's too early to say when there will be a settlement. You can discuss this issue, but the consent of the parties will be needed. He behaves correctly. So,
yeah, that's what I mentioned this, and I covered this on RBN before, where my prediction was that Trump was going to put unreasonable demands on Russia, and then once Russia turned it down, then he can go back to his MAGA base and say, "Hey, man, we were trying to be flexible. It's Russia that was being unreasonable." And I peeped that the second that Trump released his quote-unquote peace plan for Ukraine, which included European peacekeepers. I'm like, why would Russia accept this in the first place? They're in an advantageous position, and they went to war in the first place to prevent European NATO encroachment on the border. So I would have been shocked if Russia accepted that. And that was a great point you bring up, Alina, the show in the White House. My interpretation of that was after Emmanuel Macron visited Trump a few days ago, he had a big viral moment that the liberals love, where he corrected Trump, and that got news all over Europe. It got news all over the West, where liberals like, oh my God, Emmanuel Macron put Trump in his place. Now it's come out that Susan Rice and many people was advising Zelensky, and they wanted to create a viral moment where it'd be like, yeah, this is Zelensky owning Trump. Zelensky owning Trump. But people forget that meeting in the first place was about restoring relations with Zelensky. This is where Zelensky made a misstep, where he went at Trump, and then they gave Trump and J.D. Vance the opening they needed to create the political theater. So I think you're 100% on point. I think Zelensky just really messed it up, because it was way worse than I think that Trump and J.D. Vance even planned for. But once Zelensky came after them and challenged their strategy, Trump and J.D. Vance had to do something for their MAGA crowd. But I think you're 100% right. And this is why I predicted months ago that it's going to be a lot of political theater to get MAGA on side of supporting the Ukraine proxy war. But we will see how it develops. That was great analysis. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, and also I do monitor a lot of Russian geopolitical Telegram channels and stuff like that. And yeah, even they're like, it's not going to happen yet anytime soon. It's unrealistic that any sort of agreement would be reached by the summer. It's even a liberal estimate to say it would be agreed to at the end of the year. I think they're just trying to reorient the narrative about Trump being an actual anti-war candidate, preventing World War III, and also separating the U.S. from NATO. We've talked about this before. He demands that NATO countries spend 5% of their GDP on defense. We don't even do that. And it's just all of this is just kind of fracturing the World War II Western European world order, where they were kind of like our political vassals. Maybe they would use their tiny militaries to provide NATO coalition forces, not because we needed them in Iraq or Afghanistan, but America loves coalitions because it gives us more political legitimacy. So we'll take a few thousand French troops and a few thousand British troops, put them in theater, make it look like it's not just us being the world police. That's generally what the point of NATO coalitions have been since the 80s. And now Trump, in his reasoning, is why do we need that? We don't need them. The mask is off. We don't need these NATO coalitions anymore. And so I just want to shift now that we're talking about UK French peacekeepers there to secure this massive unsecurable border between two warring parties. 30,000 troops ain't going to cut it. 100,000 is more likely. Those don't exist in Europe. So, and this is why anyone with any sense that pays attention to these things, you don't even need any sort of military expertise for this. It's where are they going to come from? This deal, this ceasefire is not going to happen anytime soon. And of course, the news cycle is going to roll over a couple more times and it's going to shift to something else. But while we're on the Ukraine subject, we have been talking about the dissolution of NATO for some time. So I was just wondering what y'all's thoughts were now that we're kind of seeing it crumble in real time.
You brought up an interesting point, and Alina, I'll pass it right to you. Bringing up how Trump advocated for increasing the NATO budget to 5%, and it caught the UK and Germany off guard. Even they was man, we all for militarism, but we don't know we can actually cut this. I think Germany increased it to around 3%. And there was NATO military shit. I forgot his name. I know. I think of Mark Rutte and another NATO official that was saying that in order to reach the NATO military spending goal, and they are already starting to implement this, they need to have cuts to healthcare and social spending. So this is why I will give Trump credit whenever he calls out the empire and misdeeds, but I will never align myself with them because I'm more than just anti-war. I'm anti-imperialist. Because we know imperialism has a close relationship with capitalism. So in order to feed imperialism, you need to take more from the working class. And Donald Trump is essentially advocating for less healthcare spending, for less aid to the working class in order to maintain an imperialist structure, which is NATO, which is why it always struck me as kind of weird when people said Trump was anti-NATO. He wasn't anti-NATO. He was just upset that other countries wasn't funding NATO enough. But Alina, I know you want to chime in. I would love to hear what your thoughts as well.
Oh, no, I'm just going to basically continue from your point. Excellent point. This is the thing. What Trump is actually trying to do, and with the European Union now constantly sort of in a state of chaos, we know for a fact that the war in Ukraine is not going to end anytime soon. And we're seeing even Ursula von der Leyen, she was in Kiev, and this was at the anniversary of 3 years of the war on the 24th of February, and she had said we're going to be committing up 3.5 billion to Ukraine, and we're also going to be expanding our financial sort of investments in sort of militarizing the EU. And this is the thing. The EU has already cut back 1 billion in terms of a sort of health budget that was supposed to go to the European citizens, and that's at the EU level. Then you've got at the national level where there's been even further cuts. I mean, we remember the sort of foreign minister of Germany back in December. She basically said that they had cut something like 30 million or something like that from welfare in Germany in order to basically fuel the war in Ukraine. And this is coming at a time when the European Union, especially following the sanctions war that sort of against Russia, have the way it has severe economic repercussions on the EU. As we've spoken before, the biggest economy in Europe, which is Germany, has been severely deindustrialized in a constant state of contraction, and they've completely lost their competitive edge. Their agricultural sector is also failing. And so people's material conditions here are suffering so immensely. And we're even seeing it manifest itself in inflation and in what they call in the UK, for example, the cost of living crisis is constantly being inflamed. And now, you've got Trump, who's representing the military industrial complex, demanding there has to be 5% spending on NATO, which is his way of bargaining them up, I guess, to 3%, so that the European states will have to invest even more in spending, spend more in the military industrial complex. So they're going to be making even more profits on the back of the working class at the worst possible time for the European Union. And I mean, Italy just about makes 1.5, can only pay 1.5% in terms of its military in NATO. Sorry, and Italy right now is facing a huge crisis. I mean, and they have a debt crisis of 3 trillion, 136% of its GDP. And they're going to ask these states to basically cut more of their welfare and spend into the military industrial complex. This is going to severely break the European Union, which is why we're seeing the rise of the far right in an absence of a bona fide left-wing sort of groups within the European countries. And and a lot of these far right groups, they claim the Eurosceptical. I have my reservations about that. At the end of the day, they're neoliberal capitalists, except that they present themselves as being the far right and anti-globalist, but they are capitalists and therefore by virtue imperialists. As you said, rightfully so, there's a close relationship between imperialism and capitalism, and so it's madness, honestly. But this is just the way in which Trump is serving the imperialist class by asking for greater spending in investment in the military-industrial complex, but that's because he serves the ruling class. That's his job.
Yeah, I just wanted to. This is kind of like apropos. It's not exactly a non sequitur, but this just kind of reminds me of he campaigned, and a lot of his supporters like, oh yes, he's anti-globalist. A lot of these like Marie Le Pen. And like these Italian like neo-fascists or anti-globalists, but Trump just is offering golden visas to people for like $5 million a pop. Like people who have $5 million in exposable income are globalists. They are the international class. So I just wanted to put that out there. So a lot of this is just messaging. It's narrative. He does some stuff that drives ratings, like ambush Zelensky in the Oval Office, but like a lot of these other EU leaders are at the same time, even because of Trump's prodding, saying like, yes, we need to militarize. Also, we can't rely on the U.S. anymore. And we brought this video up of the incoming German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, on our last episode. I just wanted to play it again in case you guys missed this one. I believe it's in German, so I'll have to transliterate. All right. The absolute priority, from my perspective, is agree and stand united. Europe must agree and stand united amongst themselves. European politics is taking place without Germany. This has, of course, something to do with the election campaign and its interim phase. But I'm in close communication with many prime ministers, heads of state, and government leaders from the European Union. And for me, the absolute priority will be to, as quickly as possible, strengthen Europe so that we can step by step achieve true independence from the United States of America. I would never have believed that I would have to say something like this on a television show, but after the statements from Donald Trump last week, it's clear that the Americans, at least this part of the Americans, this administration is largely indifferent to the fate of Europe. And I'm very curious to see how we will approach the NATO summit at the end of June. Yes, we are looking forward to the NATO summit at the end of June. But just the entire order, the post-World War II European order is kind of in a tailspin. Of course, because NATO was, created to like resist any sort of like socialist, not just Russian like ideas of like Russian USSR imperialism, which is we're not even going to go into those claims, but any sort of like left-wing movements within Europe itself during the Cold War era. So I really don't know what it's going to look like, but it's interesting seeing that our vassal states kind of banding together to get some sort of, or at least there's a movement within Europe to kind of get away from U.S. influence because they see Trump, as, polite, cultured, sophisticated Europeans, completely like a reprehensible, disgusting individual, just based off like behavioral standards. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm going to say one thing here. I'll just pitch in and just say this one thing. Do not be fooled by European leaders and the narrative that they try to advance even within their sort of media declarations. As we know, Merz that's the new chancellor's name, right?
Yeah, MERS.
I'm terrible with names. This is just something that, but we know that he was former executive of BlackRock. These individuals, including Ursula von der Leyen, among a lot of the former leaders of the European Commission and Council, etc., they are part. They're part of the political class that serve the interests of the ruling class. What do I mean? These individuals who serve the financial institutions, the financial imperialist and capitalist institutions, at the expense of the working class, and they are feeding a narrative to play into this. We have to become independent from the United States in order to justify further militarization. What's also happening in Germany right now, and I think it's important to also note this, is that you have a sector of the industrialists in Germany who really do want cooperation with Russia again. But we're also seeing a direct war between industrialists and sort of financial capitalists. And what the United States is essentially trying to do is absorb all the excess industrial surplus from Germany in order to make up for its own shrinking economy, because obviously you have to sustain your profits, and given the competitiveness of, as I said before, of China coming through, the imperialists in the United States, they have to find new avenues of profit maximization, and they're going to find that in Europe. And the political class in Europe is serving them. They are compromised. They do not speak to the people in honesty, because they know damn well that this independence from the USA is mostly geared towards continuing the war, continuing the financialization of Europe. All of their industries are now moving away and being invested somewhere else, and the people are going to suffer. But they're telling them that we're doing this as a matter of sovereignty. Absolutely not. This political class they're completely compromised.
Yeah, that's very well said. And Greg, you mentioned how I think it was Lena who mentioned how the far right believe they're not globalists, and I always like to bust their balls about this. Is the globalists? I always find that as a way of them criticizing capitalism without knowing it.
Yeah.
Or the fact that they don't want to call it capitalism.
Yeah.
If you are someone who has the never-ending pursuit of capital, which a capitalist is, he's a person who has never-ending pursuit of capital, of profits. Do you think the border is going to stop them? Like if your job is to increase the amount of money your shareholders make, do you really think that national allegiance, that borders, will stop a capitalist from doing that? So the current world order that we had that they call globalism is initially the end result of a capitalist structure, a capitalist mode of production. And you brought this up. I'm glad you did, because I was going to, Lena, regarding Frederick Merz being from BlackRock. Like the European and Western democracy is a complete fraud, because the second place, I believe AFD was second place. The leader from AFD is from Goldman Sachs. So you had BlackRock versus Goldman Sachs once again in another election. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Emmanuel Macron is also a Rothschild banker. It's a complete illusion of a democracy. Before you have capitalists who influence the government, but instead they just get rid of the middleman, and they are becoming the government. What do you call that? When the corporations and the capitalist class merge with the government, we have an F word that we call that, right? But Greg, right? I think you want to chime in, right?
Yeah. No. I just wanted to say, like, when I'm talking to disaffected people from the right who are realizing that shit's not going the way it was supposed to during the campaign trail, can't use the F word yet. Have to use tyranny. They're not ready for the F word. So
yeah, I think there is value in being strategic. 100%. Yeah. I live in Missouri. I live in a deeply conservative state, and I give people on my side all the time. Like I will hijack the patriotism narrative, for example. I will say, how can you say you're a patriot if you don't believe your neighbor should have health care, for example? Like you need different messaging. I know it may make some people uncomfortable, but I do. I engage in all the time. I'm a Marxist. I don't say that in front of people. I will just explain my ideology, and I'll get them to agree with that. Yeah, and that I think there's no problem with being strategic in your messaging. But if we're talking among each other, we can nerd out with the real.
I don't use the scary word socialism. I'm just like, don't you think that American tax dollars should go to Americans?
Yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's good to be strategic. 100%. Yeah.
So I don't know what the fate of Europe is, because I just wanted to say one more thing. It's like they're separating from the U.S., but I think there's a lot of concern, at least within the political sphere, of European fragmentation. They definitely want the EU to stick together, because I don't know if you guys pay attention to European history, especially when pre-World War II nationalist movements happen. They have a tendency to literally kill each other for centuries. So I think they're kind of nervous in a hazy way about that. Do you think that's a factor at all in that, Elena?
I think it's a complicated one. I mean, listen, the European Union is, I call, one of the greatest capitalist projects to date in terms of its establishment and how it's been organized to essentially centralize power and how it's controlled by a minority sort of conglomerates, let's just say, in many ways. So in having that has served the United States and or the ruling class. It's not really an inter-state conflict here; it's a class conflict. So the thing is, it serves them to still have a European Union. However, and this I've been saying this for the better part of the last decade, the European Union from its inauguration, its legal sort of nexus as well as its economic foundations was never meant to be long lasting, because it's geared on exploitation of, particularly German and French economies were vastly exploiting pretty much the southern Mediterranean and other countries within the EU. And it was therefore, especially with the European banking crisis that took place, the reason Euroscepticism has been something that has been predominant in a lot of European countries, predating even 2022, is because it doesn't actually work. So we're going to be looking at the fragmentation of Europe. But the thing is with, I guess, the imperialists, is how they can manipulate that. So, for example, the rise of the right or even the rise of fascism, that serves them. And we've seen that happen, in World War II, a classic example. As long as we don't have left-wing sort of uprisings, which doesn't seem to be happening in Germany and in certain other places at the very least, then they can work with that, as long as they don't have any sort of socialist movements taking place, and they can actually buy out the markets, monopolize more of the market share. They're happy.
Yeah, you would think, as Greg was mentioning, knowing the history of Europe, knowing what their grandparents went through, they'll be more skeptical of war. But they're not. They're itching at the bit. Like Europe called an emergency meeting over the idea and the concept of peace happening. So what's going on here? Because they will say in one breath that Vladimir Putin is a madman who doesn't value human life, that we should be wary of. He's a warmonger. And if all these things are true, why do you guys keep messing with him? If you think about what I'm saying, if someone was unstable and someone was violent, will you engage with that person by promoting violence and hostilities against them? The European strategy is incoherent. Why is that? It's because they actively benefit from war, and this is kind of what Lena was explaining. The military-industrial complex, and Julian Assange explained this pretty well as well, where he said the goal of the West is not to have successful war, it's to have never-ending profitable war. So in Ukraine, they're using Ukrainian soldiers as war guinea pigs, because the military-industrial complex is using that war to test new battlefield innovations. New weapons are being used, and they're not conspiracy. I literally pulled up mainstream corporate media. You can find a CNN headline or article where they explain, like, "Hey guys, don't you know the Ukraine war is good because we were actually able to test out new battlefield innovations without the cost of American men." So that's another important. Go ahead, Greg. But that's another important reason why they're extremely invested in the war in Ukraine, because Lindsey Graham and many American politicians say, "Hey man, we are modernizing our weaponry because we're getting rid of the old and with the new." So whenever I see NATO leftists, that's why I call them the NATO leftists, the European Green Parties, the Bernie Sanders, the AOC, they all freaking out over this whole thing. How can you claim that you're on the left while you're cheering on entire population being used as war guinea pigs on behalf of the military-industrial complex, and you're going to tell us with a straight face that you're supporting this war because of democracy? It's clear what they're aiming for, right? But go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, no, it's one of the big things about the Ukraine war, proxy war, might piss off some of my friends who were in the military, but it's an open air weapons test. It's kind of like Gaza, the Palestine laboratory where they, test things on Palestinians and market them. But there was a lot of anxiety at the beginning around like the 2020s about what drone warfare would actually look like. And in a high intensity conflict, how America would conduct drone warfare, because nobody knew what it would look like at all. And that was a big source of anxiety for the defense the complex and the military itself. The Pentagon was like, okay, no one, like, are we going to lose a lot of people figuring it out, field testing all this equipment, in an event with like a hick fight, high intensity conflict with China or Russia or someone else. So not only is this an open air weapons test, but it's a great opportunity for different companies like Anduril and all these other drone manufacturers to be like, oh, look what the Russians can do. We need another $500 million contract to come up with electronic warfare capabilities to take out these Russian drones. And that's basically, it's actually, there's a misconception when it comes to the military industrial complex that it's about selling bombs. It's not. JDAMs cost about $30,000 a pop. That's nothing for those guys. Where you make your money is on the fucking $1 trillion F-35 project that keeps getting strung out year over year over year and is over budget year over year over year. It's these R&D contracts, and that's what the war in Ukraine has really helped with going forward. And now the U.S. is more comfortable now doing a geostrategic shift, and this is the last segment I wanted to do, from Ukraine to China. And you both, Nick and Alina, brought up earlier that this Trump's Ukraine policy, current Ukraine policy is kind of hypocritical in what he's done, and what he did was build off of Obama. Obama started the precedent of military aid to Ukraine. Trump ramped it up with actual like anti-tank weapons like Javelin missiles, which are really scary. And then, of course, Biden came in, greenlit the entire effort, and then Trump's saying he's shutting it down. Yes, okay, he's shutting it down, but that's just for an image, right? He also just forced through $3 billion of military aid to Israel within the past 72 hours at the same time. And now the U.S. government and Taiwan are negotiating over a $10 million arms contract in the near future to reinforce Taiwan, and in Marco Rubio's words, the porcupine strategy. Deterred China by making it too costly militarily for them to invade Taiwan. So it's kind of in a stasis right now. We've also seen letters from the Office of Naval Preparedness, Strategic Preparedness, that they want to get like a number of these carrier strike groups up to readiness for a 2027 engagement with China over the Strait of Taiwan. And so, yes, Trump is kind of upsetting the establishment, the defense establishment, a little bit by this Ukraine thing. But for the past 15 years, I remember when I was in the military, this shift to China has been Pan administration in the works for a long time. And there's nothing I'm seeing Trump do to stop that. Like even the Biden administration wanted to not escalate with Iran because we're trying to do this shift. The establishment, the swamp that he was supposed to drain, has wanted this for a long time. And I was wondering if you guys had any comments on that.
Yeah, the swamp wants never-ending war, and they want to advance the interests of imperialism. But it's always interesting to see the differences in strategy between the two wings of the empire. Mm-hmm. You have the, for a lack of a better term, you can call them the neoliberal Democrat wing of the establishment. Then you have more of the Christian evangelical right-wing neocon wing of the establishment. And Donald Trump and J.D. Vance's strategy, and this is the strategy that liberals tend to disagree with, is they want to peel Russia away from China. And they view that any war effort or any spending antagonizing Russia is not only a waste of time and resources, but it actually undermines your strategy to peel Russia away from China. But they all in for the ethnic cleansing plan of Gaza. They want to support Greater Israel. That's something that they're in lockstep on. And Taiwan is another thing, and this is why I pay attention to the differences, because when you see the two parties and the different wings of the establishment unite on something, that's terrifying. You have Democrats who sound no different than Marco Rubio or any Trump official when it comes to Taiwan. You explain how they are preparing with war for Taiwan. And I really, really hope for the Taiwanese people that they are paying attention to how things are going in Ukraine. What happens when you decide to side with the West. And I think China is proposing a great alternative to Taiwan because China is promising Taiwan prosperity because Taiwan greatly benefits from having China as a giant trading partner, as someone who is doing a lot of business with them. So China is promising Taiwan prosperity while the West is making false promises that they promise people all the time, that the thriving free market, escape from the influence of communism. And I promise the people of Taiwan that it will not end well if they decide to go with the neoliberal regime and they fall for this Taiwan war. I would love to hear you guys' thoughts.
Oh, my thoughts are, yes, the shrieking, chain-rattling ghost of Henry Kissinger is always right in the end.
Yeah.
So watch out.
Yeah.
What I was going to say is that there's two things, right? So on the one hand as well, Trump recently also threatened Taiwan that he's going to impose tariffs on their semiconductors and chips unless they invest more in the United States industries, which I thought was very interesting because obviously Taiwan is a mega power when it comes to the production of semiconductors and chips, et cetera, in AI, which the United States industries or the United States or Silicon Valley, they do need. So again, we're seeing Trump sort of even threaten Taiwan, which is in a way, it's ironic because on the one hand, they're trying to provide Taiwan with supposedly security and military assistance. On the other, they're trying to coerce them into more investment. So we're again seeing Trump trying to, I guess, use tariffs as economic warfare to appropriate surplus from other countries in order to save the, I guess, American economy for, again, the MAGA supporters. However, this is not even possible in the first place because for Taiwan to even start investing in the production of semiconductors, et cetera, in the United States, you would have to, establish a sort of factories that would tailor to this, and you would need a certain degree of experience that doesn't exist in surplus as it would exist in Taiwan, which I thought was really interesting to see the United States actively also threatening Taiwan at the same time. So this could also be another reason why Taiwan is also purchasing military. I think that it's something around 10 billion that they're investing into U.S. military at the moment because, he has threatened that they need more investment from Taiwan. But the second thing I think that people also have to remember is that Taiwan isn't actually even called Taiwan. It's the Republic of China. If you look at the institution, the constitution of the Republic of China, Taiwan, their constitution is meant to govern all of China. And this is what people always tend to forget, that what we call Taiwan, they view themselves as the legitimate ruler of all of China. And what the United States is effectively doing is trying to impose itself in what is a national dispute, between, the KMT, for example, or or Taiwan or the Republic of China and sort of the People's Republic of China, and who's going to govern, I guess, the totality of China, and sort of trying to create further agitation in order to justify military presence around China, and the encirclement and containment of China. However, this isn't even something that is popular among the people in Taiwan. I mean, one of the biggest parties, which is KMT, still advocates for some sort of union with China. So this isn't something that is just clear cut, even within the population there.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people are getting new to this issue, but I know Nick has a hard out in a couple minutes, but I just wanted to highlight one thing. We like to bring up Warhawk think tanks, and this time, we're going with a European publication, the Foundation pour la Recherche Stratégique. Oh my God, I haven't done French since boarding school. Okay, but it's the Foundation for the Strategic Research. U.S.-Taiwan relations amidst Trump's coercive diplomacy. I just wanted to, before we end, and to give you some, we don't give homework here, but if you want to check out this article by Simone Minet, posted written last week, just gives you kind of insight into the mainstream European strategic mind. And it's quite insane. So the future of Taiwan relations remains uncertain as several potential paths lie ahead. Trump's effort to end the war in Ukraine and disengage from Europe to focus more on China could, in some ways, benefit Taiwan. It would help reduce delays in arms sales, reallocating resources to counter Beijing's revisionist agenda and destabilizing actions in the Taiwan Strait. However, a dirty deal that would favor Russia over Ukraine and undermine European security could negatively impact Taiwan by emboldening the PRC. I'm not going to keep reading this whole article, but the last paragraph of this entire piece is kind of funny, and then we'll end on commentary about this. It's just about Europeans on the table of neoliberal anti-China hawkishness really going to screw themselves over. So, in addition, Europeans must bolster collective deterrence against any unilateral attempts by China to alter the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. To this end, member states must resist the lure of China's economy in response to the turmoil stemming from the Trump administration. While fostering dialogue with Beijing should not be overlooked, Europe must not compromise its strategic interests for short-term gains in the Chinese market.
European leaders are so cooked, man, because Europe has this intense hatred for China, and for what? Like, this is one of the issues that exposes Europeans as just vassals of the United States like none other. Like, why do they hate China? China actually been very nice to Europe. You know what I mean? Go ahead.
Prospered because I was just going to. Europe was able to prosper for the last 2 decades of cheap goods from China and cheap gas and energy resources from Russia, which is ironic because some people say like, oh, Russia's imperial, China's imperial. They were also exploited in many ways by the imperial core in order for them to prosper because they were able to exploit cheap prices. I mean, after the coup essentially took place around the dissolution of the USSR, cheap energy really bolstered, especially some of the more Western European economies to really grow. And yet they're sat there and they're, fueling this anti-China, anti-Russia rhetoric at their own detriment. And they're selling that narrative to their people through these liberal moralisms in order to coerce them to accept that as well. You will suffer and accept that. Yeah. Basically.
Well said.
Well, yeah. So I think we're going to because rules are rules, and apparently we have to engage China this way and try to isolate it from Russia and the rest of the world, and somehow strangle its economy while relying on it at the same time. We're just going to have this very confused strategy going forward. And again, it's inherently self-destructive. But the war in Ukraine is not really going to end anytime soon. And I guess we're going to do this Taiwan thing because why not? All right.
Yeah.
And they're not going to be able to separate China from Russia at this point. I will also say that.
Or Iran.
It's over. Or Iran. No.
I just wanted to say, the whole Ukraine proxy war kind of blew up in their face like that because it's increased the security relationship between Russia and Iran because Russia needed drones and Iran had this massive drone fleet. And now they have Iranian factories producing drones in Russia. And it's put them closer to China and North Korea. So yeah, this has just been a massive L on every front. It's insane.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
but they can't admit that defeat.
Yeah. I always joke around how I say this generation of the ruling class is one of the most incompetent. like Henry Kissinger is one of the most evil men of all time, but he accomplished a lot for the empire. What the Joe Biden generation has done, not only do they engage in ridiculous morally bankrupt decisions, but their decisions actually weaken the empire. So they just incompetent. So that's a joke I always like to say. But this conversation was great, man. I appreciate you guys inviting me.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, man, for coming on. We should do it again. This has been kind of our weekend exploration of the Russia, Ukraine, Taiwan connection and situation. Thanks so much, Nick from Revolutionary Blackout Network. We'll post your social in the description. You can follow him there. And again, as always, thanks, Alita, for coming on from London.
Keep up the good work, y'all.
All right. And we will see you next week. Cheers, y'all, here on Colonial Outcasts.